Well, thanks for joining us. And we have a special guest today right here in Oklahoma City at the NARMI conference. And it's my privilege to introduce you to an amazing guest. His name's Brad Wilcox. He is a professor at UVA and a senior fellow at the Institute for Family Studies. And I'm excited to have him here. He's got a new book out. Maybe that could be the new Bible for marriage champions, maybe. It's very exciting information in there. And we're going to be talking about the purpose of this podcast is to highlight great leaders in the culture and find out what they're doing, and then learn from that wisdom that they've gained on their journey and share that with the rest of us. So, Brad, you've authored many books,
right,
and the latest one is Get Married. Tell us about that.
So Get Married is basically kind of explaining, why there's been this dramatic retreat from marriage. I talk about kind of the closing of the American heart, less dating, less marriage, less childbearing, what's driving that retreat from marriage, and how we can also kind of give people encouragement about, why actually, despite this retreat, marriage is an incredibly important source of financial security for people, but it also kind of a source of meaning, direction, and happiness for Americans, and some advice about how to forge a strong and stable marriage in the 21st century. So the book kind of talks about some different strategies that people can take to maximize their odds of being both stably and happily married as well.
I'm sure that there are probably some really great principles of leadership in there. And maybe you could tell us about a few of those, and maybe even from your journey of when you first got started in this kind of research work to maybe where you're at now, and maybe there's some nuggets of wisdom that you can share with all of us that we could use in our walk.
So I think in terms of the kind of maybe the messages in the book that would relate to leadership, I think one thing is recognizing that you're kind of often a part of a community as a leader. And I talk about, the way in which both commitment matters in marriage, and then also the way in which kind of fostering a we before me mindset matters in marriage as well. And I think both of those are kind of applicable to leadership of some kind of nonprofit or company for that matter, or if you're talking about public service as well. And so when it comes to marriage, though, what we see is that couples that kind of understand and appreciate that they've made a kind of permanent commitment to someone, and then also are kind of trying to sort of not get distracted by alternative options, in their life socially and now virtually as well, are more likely to be flourishing. And you probably know the psychologist Scott Stanley talks about kind of the importance of not looking over the fence, if you will, to the other yard, and
distraction and comparison.
Yeah, that other couple's yard is greener and nicer than your yard, and well, maybe you should kind of focus on their yard rather than your yard. And he's saying, no, you need to kind of focus on cultivating your own garden, your own yard, if you will. And of course, his point is about marriage. And so as husbands, for instance, we need to focus on our wife and cultivating our wives and building them up and being with and for them as well. And so I think that the point there when it comes to leadership is recognizing that if you're heading a nonprofit or a company or some kind of in political office, you're really focusing on your institution, your state, your city, your company, your team, and not getting needlessly distracted by things happening in other institutions or other places or on other groups outside of your immediate, sort of focus of reference or circle of reference. I think that's one kind of takeaway, kind of having more also of a long-term perspective as well, kind of how do I advance the good for my city or my company or my nonprofit in a long-term way? And that's
my marriage or my family.
Right. And that's a reflection of this commitment to this one person or one institution. So I think commitment's part of it. I think also though kind of, recognizing that our culture often wants us to think about what's going to make us sort of immediately happy or going to get a dopamine hit in the moment from something. And it might be, saying something or doing something or, making some kind of move that's going to get you instant notoriety or instant money or whatever else it might be. And yet that's not the path towards forging, a good marriage long term.
That's right. Because ultimately that dopamine hit is for self.
Right.
Right. And a good leader puts others first. And even the biblical demonstration of a good leader in marriage is going outside of yourself to serve someone else, and that's where real fulfillment is. And yeah, a good friend of mine, Ted Cunningham, he talks about comparing, and the reason why the grass is greener on the other side is because there's a septic leak over there. It's not as good as you think it is. Water your own lawn and focus on your own responsibilities. And again, serve your wife, serve your kids, serve your family, and whoever the Lord calls you to serve them first before yourself. That's when you're going to demonstrate excellent leadership.
Exactly right. And I think one thing I talk about in the book is just sort of the way in which we're often told to kind of have his money and her money, to have two separate accounts where you're kind of either maximizing or kind of just protecting your own self-interest financially in the marriage. And yet we see in the data is that couples who have joint accounts, so more we before me approach to money, are much more likely to be flourishing. There's a sense that you're on a team together, you've got a future together as a couple. You're talking about how you're spending your money, trying to keep it, in check, all that stuff. That's much more productive than just kind of doing things on your own.
That's not the narrative in culture today.
Exactly.
That's not it. These are my things. It's my money. We hear that a lot because people ask us that question a lot, and we try to walk that out with them so that they could make their own choice. But I love that we before me. That just demonstrates what I was talking about earlier. So that's great. I'm glad that you're saying that.
Yes, that's the marriage message, and I think it has obvious applicability to kind of running a company, a nonprofit, a church, or some kind of political campaign or public agency. Is trying to kind of get people to understand and appreciate that we're on the same team, and then working kind of in that spirit. And so as a leader, it's kind of incumbent upon you to be thinking about not just maximizing your own platform these days, but kind of the good of the team or the nonprofit or the community where you're working.
I have a hunch on this one, but I want to get your opinion. Why do you think that people are separating out their finances, or they're not totally merging those two halves that should be one whole? Why do you think they're holding that back?
So I think one of the things that inhibits kind of developing this team-first approach, both, say, in the workplace or in a marriage, is that people can have had an experience growing up, for instance, on the family front, they saw their parents get divorced and they saw that their mom was, eviscerated financially by the divorce. And they don't want to have the same experience that their mom did. And that's understandable, right? Completely human response to a kind of a tragedy like that. The challenge, though, is you have to kind of work beyond that and try to find a spouse who's worthy of your trust and commitment. And then once you find that person, you're all in, right? Financially and otherwise. And so just because your parents' marriage, ended in divorce doesn't mean that your marriage can't end in death. I mean, that is, one of you dies first, and that's the point, right? But more, kind of put it more positively, just to kind of enjoy that sort of strong and stable marriage where you really trust your spouse on every level, including financially. That's what you're aiming for. You should be aiming for, and so that's why I talk about kind of the importance of fostering this team approach to marriage and then money in particular as well.
But as a society, we need to produce more desirable marital candidates.
Right.
More responsible, more faithful, more, those are the folks that are, getting a job, they're finishing high school, they're staying out of drugs, they're being more socially and emotionally intelligent. We were talking earlier about interacting when kids are younger, just learning that social structure and being able to communicate and be more emotionally intelligent in those ways and learning those skills early. We need to produce a society of good marital candidates, and our parents need to be doing that, and our leaders need to be doing that. Because ultimately those folks are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They're going to be leading their home. They're leading their marriage. They're leading their family. And this, the families that are healthier and those marriages that are staying together, those people are going to avoid poverty. They have a 98% chance of avoiding poverty if they're following the success sequence. And, if we can produce people that are learning those skills and that are acting in those ways, behaviorally in society, that it's ultimately going to lead to financial strength, and our marriages are going to be healthier, our homes are going to be healthier, our kids are going to be healthier. They're going to, we're going to produce more wealth. We're going to be more emotionally secure and happy, and all those things.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, I think once you have that kind of team-based mentality, you're much more likely to be flourishing, financially, emotionally, socially, and in ways that kind of just that separate you out from the way a lot of Americans are experiencing the world today. So yeah, everything you said is on the money, basically.
Sure. Yeah, those are the kind of leaders that we need for tomorrow to take us into, the things that we're ahead. Because, there's some things happening in our culture right now that are a little frightening, and we need strong men and women to lead us into that future. Just real quickly, in the time that we have left, what do you think makes a good leader? What characteristics, what behaviors?
So I think having a clear sense of your own gifts and talents in terms of, how you're going to be able to contribute in a unique and powerful way to your own institution. It could be your church, could be your nonprofit, could be your company, whatever it might be. And that you're able to kind of also sort of speak clearly and honestly to your colleagues about what's happening and where you're situated. And then, making difficult decisions, kind of engaging in or appreciating kind of the need to risk at times, your position, your place, your community, your institution, your nonprofit. These are all things that I think are associated with leadership, and trying to figure out too how you can kind of maximize the welfare of your colleagues and employees, or, co-believers when you're involved in some kind of group effort as well. But it's important, I think, in speaking about leadership, to recognize that there are different kinds of leadership. And so some people are going to be more likely to kind of be prophetic in their leadership, speaking or writing in ways that are sending an important message that might be, contrarian or challenging. Some people are going to be more likely to lead by kind of administering, kind of ruling over their nonprofit or their community or their company. And we have to recognize that there's different forms of leadership too that are, or some people are going to be like entrepreneurs. They've got like a great new idea they're trying to, to bring to market, and they're pretty passionate, and they have a very clear sense of how they want to kind of like market this and develop this product and get it out there, and they kind of bring people behind them. So I think one challenge of leadership is just to recognize there's not one way to be a good leader, that there are kind of different forms of leadership in our moment. And I think my gifts have been more in terms of communication, writing, to some extent speaking, but really writing especially, about some important topics on the family front. And so I'm not necessarily,
Well, and you do that well. You do that well. You are getting out the truth, and it's not just your opinion. You're backing that up with data. I mean, you devoted your life to this kind of work, and obviously it's important to you. And I like what you said about some characteristics of leadership. One in particular, about making difficult decisions and managing risk, because I'm sure there's plenty of men and women out there that when they're in a position of leadership, sometimes it may seem easier to kind of succumb to the situation. But I think that's when character rises up and says, no, we need to do the right thing here, even if it's difficult, even if it hurts. And really, that's an evidence of a good leader, that they're willing to make those difficult decisions. They're willing to risk for a purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think that's really important, because, again, sometimes people are, they just kind of wither away and they let, the situation take over. And if you keep letting that happen, that's not good. That is not good for whoever is under that leadership.
Right. And I think, you have to sort of pick your battles, right? Prudentially, you have to sort of figure out, I'm going to sort of fight this issue. I'm going to just, navigate around this other issue, right? But I think the challenge...
With purpose.
Right. In this culture, you're not fighting for the sake of fighting. I mean, I think some people have a problem in that direction, right? But I think there are a lot of places in the contemporary culture where people are just, they're just keeping their head down all the time, even though, they recognize that what's happening in their company and their university, whatever else, is wrong and off the mark. And so I think the challenge is to encourage more of our, of our fellow citizens, fellow believers, people who are watching your work, to try to be strategic about like, okay, there are certain things that I can address, I need to address, I need to challenge that are happening in my workplace or my community or my family, or my church community, and to have the courage to do that. Recognize you can't tackle everything, but there's often some good targets that are there for, the picking, so to speak. And
It was that Mother Teresa said, we can't do everything, but everybody can do something.
correct, right.
And we need to, like you said, we need to pick our battles, whatever is within our power to do so.
Right.
We take a stand, do the right thing.
And I think one of the things about this too, if you have no enemies, then you're not doing your work. Right. I'm serious. Like if you have not
That's a good
made
point.
someone angry or annoyed or whatever, jealous or thinks you're just, out to lunch, it's probably because you're just too milquetoast, right?
You're just
Too
coasting.
lukewarm. Yeah.
You're just pleasing everybody. And, believers get this one. If you're doing a righteous thing in the name of the Lord, you're going to have an opposition. And if you're not, well, maybe you're not doing the right thing.
Yes.
And check yourself on that, have that kind of awareness. Well, what kind of projects are you working on right now? What's your next big thing? Or maybe you tell us about why we should get this book, Get Married. What's in there that's going to grab our attention?
Well, I think this book kind of gives people two things. One is going to give them a bunch of reasons why marriage matters for them and for their kids. And so in a culture that I think tends to discount marriage, it's a resource in that way. But then also kind of gives, I think there are a lot of young adults who are worried they're going to fail at marriage. And we've heard voices like Andrew Tate on the right. And then I talk about, people on the left who writing for places like, the New York Times and Bloomberg, who are kind of saying that, marriage is a bad deal, especially for women, And so my book kind of gives people some concrete advice of how they can forge a strong marriage as a wife or as a husband, and kind of gives them a path to doing that and to sort of avoiding some of the pitfalls that might kind of bring them down, or even worse, land them in divorce court. So that's, I think, a word of encouragement in terms of the book. In terms of what the next thing I'm doing, we're doing a couple of state-based reports. One is with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we're going to be kind of looking at the role of marriage and family in Texas, and then offering some concrete recommendations about what Texan legislators can do to strengthen marriage and family in Texas. And then we'll do similar effort in Ohio, about 5 months later. So that's those two efforts in Texas and in Ohio are now on deck for these family studies.
That's interesting.
My colleagues, yeah.
I definitely want to stay in the loop with you on that and in contact with you. Well, how can we get your message out there to help others? And how can we find your book? How can we get that in the hands of pastors and business leaders, people that really want to champion marriage and be a part of this success that they can have in marriage?
So the book is accessible at Amazon, but also HarperCollins, and then I'm on Twitter, Brad Wilcox IFS, and then These Are Family Studies has a nice blog that comes out Monday through Thursday on a range of marriage and parenting issues and challenges, and that's familystudies.org, and that's easy to access as well.
Excellent. And I just have enjoyed my time with you here, Brad, and I just like to say that may the Lord Jesus Christ get all the glory, and thank you for coming and being a part of this interview, and I can't wait till we do the next session with you and give us an update on what you're working on down the road and what you've learned since then in leadership.
Okay, well, thanks, Jerry. I appreciate being with you.
Bless you. Thank you very much.